If my personal experience will help you, please let me tell you that it is these periods of meditation, whether they last 30 seconds or 10 or 12 minutes, that is responsible for the entire success of our activity from its beginning. And the reason is this: the very act of closing the eyes and looking within is the same as saying, I am of my own self nothing, and now speak, Lord, thy servant heareth. In other words, it is creating a vacuum. It is acknowledging God closer than breathing. It is acknowledging that the human itself is without presence or power, and an expectancy of this transcendental presence to take over, to make itself manifest. Now, this really takes less than 30 seconds, and yet it is a complete act of humility. It is a complete act of self-surrender and the acknowledgement that he that is within me is greater than he that is in the world. The Father within me is greater than I. The Spirit of God, or Christ, is greater than Joel. And again, it is an acknowledgement that he that is within me, or rather, he performeth that which is given me to do. He perfecteth that which concerneth me. All of these things, you see, all of these statements are an acknowledgement of a transcendental presence and power greater than the human mind or body. And that makes room for that transcendental presence to take over, so that eventually it says, I can say, I live yet not I. Christ liveth my life. Now, how that appears on the outer scene is something that is beyond our ability to determine and actually even to control. It makes you a beholder. Back in the book, The Infinite Way, it tells you, be a beholder. And the reason it says that is because that was the experience I had. Be a beholder and watch God at work. Watch the presence go before you to make the crooked places straight. Watch he do that performing that is given me to do, and then you get the correct idea of meditation. Meditation as a practice is nothing in and of itself. It is only that it serves as an opportunity to surrender the belief in the power of one's own mind or body and make room for he that is within me. Make room for the imprisoned splendor to escape. Never underestimate the function of meditation. Never believe that in the spiritual life you can live without it, although eventually it gets to be a practice of anywhere from 10 seconds to 10 minutes, but it becomes a practice that is repeated hour after hour after hour. And under certain circumstances, when the pressure gets too heavy from this world, sometimes it's a matter of hours and hours and hours of meditation. Now, the question is, atheism is fear, and the increased number of people going to churches is also fear. What is the difference in this fear? To begin with, the statement isn't wholly correct. Many of these people who go to church are not going through fear. They're going in, those that haven't found it are going in the hope of finding that which will solve the human problems. They recognize that there are human problems, and they've probably come to a place, I'm sure, in our world, the vast majority of people have come to the recognition now that there's no human way to save the world, that no man is going to do it, no people are going to do it, no boards are going to do it, no groups are going to do it, and I am sure that vast numbers are going to church in the hopes of finding out how God can be brought to the scene and do it. Some undoubtedly go only in fear, and of course their fear is no different than the fear of atheism, because they both have their foundation in the lack of understanding of the nature of a principle. But never believe for a moment that all of these masses of people who are going to church are going through fear. No. Let me tell you something about that. Many of the churches of this land are offering their congregations the latest in spiritual teachings, mental teachings, metaphysical teachings. And remember that all of these are beneficial, because anything that takes people out of their ancient superstitions and fears, anything that makes it possible for people to stop fearing God and begin to love God, is helpful. And anything that turns them away from a blind faith in God is helpful. And so all of these newer means, whether they are in the metaphysical sciences, mental sciences, spiritual sciences, every one of these is playing a part in leading people away from the God whom they have ignorantly worshipped, and lifting them at least a step higher, until one day when they will realize the nature of the self and know the truth. No, we can never play down the part that churches are playing in the lives of people. What role does gratitude play in this understanding? I'm always saying, thank you, Father, for all blessings. That type of gratitude is mighty important, because it is the same type of humility that we indulge in meditation. It is an acknowledgement that there is something greater than I am, something greater than the human self, something greater than the human mind, and that sense of gratitude is the true, it is really true religion. The person who says grace for the food on their table is more than likely missing the entire spiritual message. But the person who says, thank you, Father, not for the food on the table, for thy Spirit, for thy grace, the person who recognizes the source, that person is saying grace in a manner that will most assuredly reveal their daily bread and cake too. But the sense of gratitude to the Father is the deepest there is. The gratitude that we express to each other as instruments or transparencies is the same. It is only acknowledging the depth of God realization that each of us has in whatever measure we have. And so it is that it would be an impossibility for a person to live the spiritual life without a full sense of gratitude, not only to God, but to every individual who in any way becomes an instrument for God in their experience, whether expressed as spiritual guidance or whether expressed as buying them a meal. Now, you know as well as I do how many people there are today who are making it possible for youngsters to receive an education who might not otherwise be able to. Education in schools, colleges, universities, education in arts and sciences, education in music. How many are making available summer camps to the poor boys and girls who otherwise would never get off the streets of New York or Chicago or someplace like it. How would it be possible to live a life without feeling gratitude to them? How could one possibly live on the face of the earth and not feel a deep sense of gratitude to all men and women who make it possible for others to enjoy the spiritual fruits, educational fruits, artistic fruits that otherwise they might not have? I wouldn't know how an individual could feel at all that they had a taste of spiritual sense who wasn't living in a complete sense of gratitude from morning to night and night to morning. And of course, that eventually rises to the highest form of gratitude when we're grateful and not even knowing who to or what for. Just grateful, period. Just living in an inner sense of gratitude without even an object of that gratitude, and yet not forgetting. Is it incorrect to tithe? It is, most assuredly, under some conditions. If one believes that by giving 10% they're going to get 90%, it is incorrect to tithe and expensive. It would be far better to keep that 10% and use it than to suffer disappointment, because giving out 10% never did bring back 90%, except some years ago when we had 520% Miller. He always gave back 520% for what you gave him, but that was only the first week or two. No, this thing of getting something for nothing is bad business. But again, gratitude, if it only remains a word in the mouth or a feeling or an emotion, may not be gratitude. It may be just emotion. The gratitude that compels a person to give a percentage of their earnings of the first fruits, not of what's left over, but of the first fruits, to impersonal causes, sending children to summer camps or sending children to school or college or paying for music lessons or art or something, that impulsion which compels a person to give voluntarily a portion of their earnings without any desire for return, without any thought of return. As a matter of fact, with a feeling of shame if anyone should suggest return, that tithing is the grandest expression of gratitude that has ever been conceived. When it was originally conceived by the Hebrews, that was its intent. Be so grateful for this freedom that has come to you. Be so grateful for your release from Pharaoh that you give 10% to impersonal causes, in that case the church. But for our gratitude, for release from the fears of the world, I do not see how it is possible to refrain from tithing, from sharing that which we have with others, always impersonally. Don't we interpret what we read according to our level of consciousness? In other words, we do, most definitely. No one can read anything higher than their own state of consciousness. And that is why you may read a passage of truth, a scriptural passage, and get one meaning from it this year, an entirely different meaning next year. As a matter of fact, you may get no meaning from it this year, and next year the whole light may open up on that subject, because there again, nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so, and nothing is anything except in accord with the consciousness that we bring to it. Same with music, isn't it? And the same with art. How can anyone appreciate music if they don't bring music appreciation to it? How can anyone appreciate art if they haven't got an artistic sense? In other words, you just can't look at a painting, you just can't hear music and get from it that which is in it. You have to first bring to it your developed capacities. And that is what the Master meant when he said, do you have eyes and do not see? Do you have ears and do not hear? Do you not have spiritual discernment to understand what I'm saying? When tempted to indulge in negative thoughts, such as antagonism and so forth, what is the best way to cope with them and nullify the effect? Well, I suppose the best way that I know of is to realize its source. If you can think of carnal mind or mortal mind without setting up an antagonist, I don't know of any better way than that. To realize that these emotions that are being expressed through me are not mine. That is this carnal or mortal mind, which is not an enmity against me, but which is the arm of flesh, or a tempter. And of course, if it's a tempter, we can say, I'm not having any. You see, the most important part of the Infinite Way message is this, that when you are confronted with false appearances, that you do not attempt to refute it or combat it or fight it or overcome it or argue against it, but that you instantaneously recognize it as mortal mind or nothingness, the arm of flesh. That is really the entire treatment secret. Kind of open secret, I mean it's in all the books, but secret among us. That is it. The ability to look at the appearance with the unconditioned mind and not judge that it's good or evil, but have no judgment. And then it falls of its own nothingness. The very moment that a mental defense goes up, you are in the second chapter of Genesis, and you've made mind and its thoughts a power, and now you're going to fight them. You're never going to win. But the moment you recognize something coming into your thought without fighting it or combating it, which would mean without judging it, and recognize it merely as this universal mind projecting itself, and then recognizing that this is this devil that tempted Jesus, and do the same as he did. Get thee behind me, Satan, I'm having none. That's the only way I know. Heaven knows it isn't easy. This is a question I don't feel qualified to answer. You said the time will come when the lion and the lamb will literally lay down together, as there will be no violence anywhere in men's thoughts. It appears to me that in this light, Rickenbacker's demonstration was not perfect. Instead of receiving manna from the sky, he reached for a helpless bird and killed it. Somehow I have an idea that before the human mind can do away with the destruction of animals for food and shoes and so forth, I have an idea it will have to get used to the idea of not sending its own sons and daughters out to be slaughtered. When we have overcome the belief that it's glorious to send our daughters and sons out to die, I think that we will at that same time have overcome the belief that it's necessary to slaughter animals to live. Right now, the universal belief of the whole world is that in order for us to live, we must order the death of our own sons and daughters. We must proudly put them in a uniform and send them out to die for us and the red, white, and blue, or the black and green, or whatever the color may be. If you really believe that your life is dependent on the life of your daughter or son, if you really believe that your safety, security, and liberty are to be had at the expense of the life of your son or daughter, I think you're still far from any real concern about the animals. First, let us eliminate from our consciousness the slaughter of men and women, in particularly the youth. I would have less feeling about it if all these noble men and women of 40 and 50 went out to do the battle and left their sons and daughters home to start the new world with. But I notice that it's always the 16, 17, 18, 19-year-olds who are sent out to save our 50 and 60-year-old lives. My own inner life is lived toward the realization of God as individual consciousness, thereby eliminating material sense, overcoming the qualities in human thought which breed wars. And do you know that I'm convinced that when that has taken place, we will also find that we have an equal feeling against taking the lives of animals. Then we will be enabled to live on other foods. At the present time, while we indulge the slaughter of human beings, I don't believe we can rightly say that we have a feeling for animals. We have feelings of a sort, but our first and greatest feelings must come to the human race. And then, when that's overcome, look at these animals and say, and you're our brothers too. Start with the top. It has been said, strike for the highest and it'll include the lesser. And it will. Whenever I meditate, I have a tingling feeling in my chest. Does this mean that God is present? When meditating, any kind of physical or mental sensation may take place. It is not necessarily a sign of the presence of God. It is merely a sign of making progress in meditation. And as we learn to disregard those sensations, they disappear. In other words, when our attention is on effects, as if they were something, we miss the way. If the effects appear, let them. But don't expect them, don't desire them, and as fast as they disappear, rejoice. Because you cannot change the fact of omnipresence just because you have a feeling or don't have a feeling. Omnipresence is still true, and the Father still is closer than breathing and nearer than hands and feet. But there may be mental or physical sensations accompanying a progressive stage of meditation. If so, it's perfectly all right. Was Jesus a real Israelite Jew? Actually, I do not know the meaning of Israelite Jew, so I cannot answer it. All I know is from Scripture that he was a rabbi and that he preached in the synagogues. More than that I don't know, because I'm not a scholar of those things. But all of that is being revealed in these new scrolls. I do believe that the freedom of the world has been attained and that all of its danger has passed. That these momentary things or minor things that we will go through in these next 50 years are merely the cleaning up or aftermath. In other words, I have witnessed healings of so-called serious diseases and found that symptoms sometimes last for 24 hours, 48, and sometimes a month or two before all of them are finally and completely cleared away. And so it is that this healing which has taken place in the world has taken place in the inner kingdom and is being made manifest in our outer affairs. And the fact that here and there will be disturbances and wars and rumors of wars is really secondary to the main issue, that we are in the era of freedom, of peace, and everything is working together toward that end. Is the letter of the infinite way or of Christian Science exceedingly vital to the length of our stay here on earth? I would say so, indeed yes. Indeed yes, because through the letter we attain the spirit, and when we attain the spirit we demonstrate more of what is called longevity. Certainly there are thousands, tens of thousands of people all over the globe who are here today going on with a human sense of life, who without these modern metaphysical teachings would have passed on a long time ago. Why are paralytic cases of long-standing difficult to heal completely? The reason for a lot of difficulty in healing long-standing cases is the attitude of the patient. They lose that first keen desire to be healed. They get used to their condition. They more or less settle back in it, and in some cases wouldn't give it up. But in any event, even if they would, it becomes difficult after they've accepted it and settled down into some kind of a new life. And it does make it difficult. I've had that experience. But on the other hand, I've also found that where there was a desire, cases can be met. Not if people are just going to sit back in a wheelchair and expect you to lift them out. That's difficult. But where they are desirous of being healed and will make some inner effort, they can have their freedom too. I and God are one, I and you and God are one, I and me. An individual expression of God is one with you, another individual expression of God. Would you discuss the difference between individuals? That should have been covered last night when I said that we are individuals and God expresses its infinite individuality through us in different ways. Now, Paul tells us that it is given to one to be a minister and one a healer, one a writer, and so forth and so on. And I'm sure that it's true that since God expresses its individuality infinitely, that each of us has a spiritual mission to perform. We are not doing it, all of us, and that is because without our conscious contact with God, we are not under the law of God, neither indeed can be, and we're doing that which lies nearest at hand. In other words, because I was born into a business family, I became a businessman. I don't think I have to tell you that my life and my love wasn't in the business world. You have seen where it is. But I could no more attain this than I could attain flying without wings. Only through conscious contact with God was I lifted out of that world into that which is my joy, my life, my everything. So it is, I have found with students with whom I've worked, I have had instances of a girl, a secretary, turning to this work for help in a problem. And last week she sang her first role in grand opera in a leading role. A girl who never dreamed in her experience, never dreamed that she was a singer, and in 7 short years has taken a leading role in grand opera. That is because, having made the contact, she was lifted out of where she was under the law of God and brought into harmony with her divine nature, not her circumstance in life. And so it is that I've witnessed with men and with women how many of them have been led out of positions in which they were, some into spiritual work, some into art, some into literature, some into music, and they have wondered how it could ever have been that they were a part of that other world. Well, they really never were. It was only in their sense of separation from God that they had to do something to make a living. They had to do something to stay on earth, and they did that which was nearest at hand, but it was not their destiny. God is their destiny. And once they have their contact with God, that old world disappears, evaporates, and is no more, and is only remembered as a recollection, as if it were happening to somebody else, as if it had happened to somebody else. And one lives then in the divine present, fulfilling their God destiny. If I'm convinced of anything at all, I'm convinced of this, that the human race is not under the law of God, neither indeed can be, and that is why it lives more or less as animals, living off of one another or upon one another, preying upon one another as we all prey upon animals, and as animals prey upon each other. But only until we are liberated, only until we make a spiritual contact, until we have illumination, and then we no longer live off of each other, and then we will no longer live off of animals, and then we will find that even animals do not live off of each other, because it isn't necessary. There is a God contact that is our food and clothing and housing, and we do not need each other. We need only to share with each other. You'll find that all through the writings. And that answers this question too about babies. Babies come into the world, many of them as humans. Some do not. Some do not. Some come into this world very, very, very much illumined. I recall one instance of a man who was playing piano, playing organ, in fact, at 3 years of age. And when still a young man, was a conductor of a symphony orchestra and later of a large symphony orchestra in the United States, and without any benefit of teaching in Sanskrit, under divine orders, translated the Bhagavad Gita into English from the Sanskrit without ever having studied a word of Sanskrit. And he came into this world and was giving evidence of it at 3 years of age. So there are people who come into this world. I'm sure some of these musical geniuses come into this world at least partially spiritually developed, if not wholly so. And so it is that while most babies do come in, as most of us came in, just human beings, just little animals, and acting like it, eventually, through God realization, through God contact, we are lifted out of that animality. And that too is another answer to the one who asked the question about the slaughter of animals. Please remember that the human race, which is indoctrinated, which is made up of that living on and off and through animals, can't stop it of its own free will and accord. It's an impossibility, any more than an alcoholic can stop drinking alcohol or a gambler can stop gambling. It's impossible to expect them to do it unless and until the Christ is introduced into their experience and the Christ sets them free. And so that Christ is going to set us all free from manslaughter and animal slaughter. And there we are again. Let us stop for a meditation because we have closed a subject. Let us return to the subject of prayer. You see, in the light now of what we had Monday, Tuesday, and this evening, you must understand that none of this truth is of any value to anybody as long as it remains printed words in a book or even spoken words. I won't say any value, no, that's not right. It has its value, but its value is to start us up on the path toward prayer. It is actually in prayer that these principles become operative. They do not become operative as long as they are merely intellectual statements. Now here we are in a different world than the material and mental world. In the material and mental world, it is only necessary to know these laws of electricity or laws of electronics and then hook them up and they work. That is not true in our field of my kingdom, the spiritual kingdom. Knowing these words, sentences, paragraphs, knowing whole books will not bring about the demonstration. It will only serve to spark thought, to act as a pump primer in which you go into prayer or meditation, and these principles then live. You see, if the fact that evil is impersonal and impotent, if the intellectual knowing of that were enough, then this room is already empty of all sin, disease, death, lack, and limitation. And the mere fact that you and I know it isn't is proof that there must be another step. In these 3 nights we have declared all of the truth that's been revealed to human consciousness, spiritual truth, and a great deal of the mental truth. And yet we go on with some pains and discords and hates and envyings and jealousies. So merely the statement about these principles is not the demonstrator of them. And so we go to the next step, and that is prayer. Prayer may have, or does have really, several depths or layers, degrees, call it. We may go into prayer first in this way. We may close our eyes and ponder the nature of God as spirit, as omnipresence, as omnipotence, as spiritual law governing all effect. We may ponder the nature of God as that which neither gives nor withholds, but which eternally is, and eternally is operative, and eternally is closer to us than breathing and nearer than hands and feet. We may ponder the nature of God as that which neither judges, criticizes, nor condemns, neither punishes nor rewards, but is an eternal state of isness, divine being, spiritual life and law. And then we may go further by saying, well, since this is the case, what of this particular discord? And then we may ponder this impersonality. Now we have learned that this evil is not of me, sin, disease, lack, whatever it may be. is not of me, but neither is it of him or her or it. It is an impersonal something, a something without person, in whom, on whom, or through whom, or as whom to operate. It is like that devil standing over in the corner. No part of man, no entity or identity, and having absolutely no power other than to suggest, to appear, to tempt. Otherwise it is a nothingness. Therefore, evil of any nature is a nothingness, the arm of flesh. And then we may rehearse in our mind that story of Hezekiah and the Hebrews who rested in his word, in this word. Then we may jump up to the Master and watch him as he stands at the tomb of Lazarus and says, "Come forth," or to the impotent man, "What did hinder you?" And realize the unreal nature, the impotence of that which appears to us as error, sin, disease, death, lack, limitation. And then we realize why this is not of man, this is of the carnal mind, the devil, the tempter, but it is nothing. It is only something if I can be made to accept it. It is a universal claim, or it is a claim of that universal mesmeric mind, that mind of Adam, the belief in two powers. Nothing. Now, we have carried our prayer, and at this stage you may also call it treatment if you like. Prayer at that stage may be synonymous with treatment. So we'll call this either a treatment or the first stage of prayer. Now, when we have carried that to the point that we are no longer fearing this condition, the mind begins to settle down and be quiet, and we can turn within. Now, God, it's your turn. Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth. When God utters his voice, the whole earth of error melts. And so now we turn in and listen. It is as if the ears were wide open, waiting to hear something. And yet in the chest there's an inner stillness, a peace, a relaxing. Because we've already come to the state of consciousness now in which we're not fearing this condition. We have declared its impotence. Inwardly we're still and quiet, but the ear is open and the mind is alert. Most of you remember the hymn, "I will listen for thy voice. Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth." Awake, alert, no sleepiness, no sitting around, "Oh, God's going to do it." We need an actual experience. We're waiting for an actual contact. We're waiting for an assurance from within that God is on the scene. Now, in our first experiences of this nature, we may not be able to maintain that silence for very long. We may not be able to maintain that listening attitude for long, and so we don't force ourselves, because we'd be going back into the mental realm then and doing mental gymnastics. We stop. If we find we're not at inner peace and our ears are not alert, we just stop. If we have the opportunity an hour or two later, we try it again. And we do it as to whatever extent we can, attaining whatever sense of inner peace we can. Try it again an hour or two later. This we practice. Practice treatments, practice meditations, practice that stage of prayer until the time does come when you can sit down and eventually receive an inner assurance in one form or another. Sometimes it comes actually in audible words. Sometimes it comes just in a feeling. Sometimes it comes in the dropping of the shoulders, like a sense of release, as much as say, that's it, or all's well, or God's on the scene. A feeling comes, a feeling. Now, that's enough. Prayer has served its purpose. And usually we will find that there are signs following. But remember that as students, it would be abnormal if we just expect to get the same results that seasoned students are getting, or those who have become practitioners. Just remember that it takes patience to come to a state of consciousness which does not refute and battle error, and that's what we are attaining in prayer. We are bringing ourselves to a state of consciousness in which we are not even going to God for a healing. We're not trying to get a God power to do something to an evil power. Prayer is to bring us into that atmosphere of recognition of none power. Just what Jesus said. Rejoice not that the devils are subject unto you. It isn't even true. You aren't subject unto any devils. That's the place to come to through prayer. A place of inner peace, inner quiet, inner calm, in which there is the assurance that there are not two powers. There is no evil power, so you're not looking for a God power. You're not even looking for truth over error or mind over matter. All you're doing in this prayer, in the first stage of it, is reminding yourself of these principles which enable you to relax your fears, then to settle back into the second stage, in which you are no longer looking for the power of God. You're no longer looking for a power to do something for you or to destroy something else. You're resting in this word. They have only temporal power. They have only the arm of flesh or nothingness. And it is in this assurance of none power in which you make your contact with God. You can't make it while the mind is active in trying to overcome, destroy, or rise above. You can't make your God contact while the mind is fighting, because the mind is I-ness, personal sense, and it interferes. It is not under the law of God, and it is only when that I-ness is out of the way and inner peace and quiet reigns, and this receptive attitude, listening attitude, that into that can come the voice of God and the earth melter. It is helpful in that stage of prayer, the second stage, to remember that not by might, not by power. I'm not seeking any might, spiritual might, mental might, or physical might. Not by might, nor by power. This is not to be achieved. Heaven is not to be achieved by might or by power, but by my Spirit. If so be the Spirit of God dwell in me, this is enough. In thy presence is fullness of life. Not by might, not by power, just in thy presence. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Not by might, not by power, just where the Spirit of the Lord is. In quietness and in confidence shall be my peace. Not by might, nor by power, but in quietness and confidence. And all of this, you see, is an inner prayer releasing us for the desire for power. Whether it's the power of the mind or the power of spirit or the power of God or the power of whatever. We want to be released from a desire for power. You see, the whole world right now, I mean the world of thinkers, is acknowledging on a worldwide scale That it's no use getting the other powers now to bring peace on earth. We've got to find something that isn't power. Unless we find something that isn't power, the world's going to be burnt up with power. But don't be alarmed. It has been found. It has been recognized that power is not going to restore peace on earth. And it has been recognized, among us at least, that power is not going to restore health to your body or to your mind, but the absence of power, spirit, the presence of the Lord. In thy presence is fullness of life. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty, but not by might nor by power. Where the Spirit, where that gentle Spirit is, where that gentle presence is, there is harmony and peace and joy. But what are the sins and what are the diseases? In the presence of God there aren't any. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there isn't a trace of sin, disease, death, lack, or limitation. There can't be the presence of God and anything unlike God, for God is infinity, omnipotence, omniscience. And so it is, you come to that second stage where your prayer, remember the first stage was your declaration of the nature of God and your declarations of the impersonal nature of evil and your statements of the impotence of such impersonal powers. And then you go on into the second stage, which is leaving all of that behind and now coming to the place of, in thy presence is fullness of joy. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is peace, in quietness and confidence, not by might, not by power, but by thy Spirit. Dwell in this Spirit. Dwell in this lack of might, lack of power. Dwell in the presence of God. Dwell in the conscious realization that where I am, God is. Where God is, I am. And then you'll pass into the third stage of prayer, in which thought disappears and a complete stillness envelops you. That won't come in the first week or 2 or 3 or 5. Be patient. You must remember that you have behind you dozens of generations of minds that have never learned to be still. And now you are going to move into a whole new area of consciousness in which you're going to live not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit. And as you attain that inner stillness, you will understand the final secret of life. Living by grace. Take no thought what you shall eat or what you shall drink. Live by grace. And you'll understand then that grace is the absence of physical and mental power. In the absence of physical and mental power, there is a state of grace, a something that takes over and governs your life. I live, yet not I. Christ liveth my life by grace, not by power, by grace. From there, prayer deepens until it gets into an actual meditation, which is a communion with God. Here, an inner presence is felt as if there were two of us. It is as if there was a me, Joel, and then this inner presence with which I can commune. Sometimes I can speak to it, not ask it for any favors. And sometimes it speaks to me, and not always audibly, not always in words, but in a feeling that there's a givingness and a comingness, back and forth, as if there were a flow from me to it and from it to me, and all within my own being. I and the Father are always one. Here where I am, God is. So it's always one. It's always taking place within me. Those who love God supremely go to the next step in which they disappear entirely and nothing's left but God. That is called the attainment of the mystical estate. That is mysticism demonstrated. And those periods last only briefly. Sometimes minutes, sometimes hours, and in a few cases they have lasted as long as 3 days. And then one comes out of it and is back on earth, but in the earth, but not of it. And that's where we are. On the third night, we've ended the class. Tomorrow we'll have to bring Pachisi games.